In 1993, famed Thunder Force developer Technosoft released Hyperduel in Japanese arcades. This was significant for two reasons. First, Technosoft did not release many arcade games, and second, this arcade game was ported to only a single home console, the Sega Saturn. Coupled with its rarity, this has made Hyperduel a much sought after addition to the libraries of hardcore fans of the platform. Believe it or not, this was not a well-received product when it was released in late 1996 for the Saturn. Japanese gaming magazines saw it as a relic of times past, and rated it extremely low compared to Technosoft's past efforts. In this episode, we will go over Hyperduel's graphics, sound, and gameplay, and I'll share my feelings on its overall quality and whether it's worth the obscene amount of money it sells for on the gray market. I hope you guys enjoy Hyperduel on the Sega Saturn. The gameplay of Hyperduel is not all that dissimilar to the games in the Thunder Force series. In the beginning, you get a choice of ships called Buster Gears, each piloted by different characters, and each differing slightly in main attack and specials. Each Buster Gear is also capable of two forms to do battle that are tied to the two attack buttons. The first button arms the fighter mode, or what amounts to the basic spaceship. It's fast, highly maneuverable, and what you'll use for the majority of the game. You also have an armor mode that transforms the ship into a mech, and is used by the second attack button. This form is slower, bigger, and much more powerful. It also allows you to aim your attack up and down, something the fighter mode doesn't do. Both forms have a special attack by holding both buttons together simultaneously. Here, a pair of satellites emerge from your ship, and, depending on the Buster Gear you have, will spray the area around you with various attacks. This is governed by the small attack gauge you see at the bottom of the screen. Use it wisely because it can really help you out on the tougher stages and boss fights. Your attacks are powered up by collecting the P icons that you see on the screen frequently. This will make your main cannon bigger and stronger, as well as your secondary special attacks. You can also collect the B icons to replenish your special gauge. Taking a death will prompt a helper ship to drop a few power-ups to get you back into the battle more efficiently. You also have the ability to gain additional firepower thanks to the secondary ships that will help you. These are the icons that cycle the letters T and G. One is a ship like yours that attacks enemies in a straight line. The other is a small mecha that goes after enemies on their own accord. Both these little guys add a tremendous amount of firepower, and you can have up to 3 at any given time. They do take damage, however, and can be destroyed. The visuals of Hyperduel are, for the most part, arcade accurate. Most of the effects are the same. The parallax scrolling is where it's supposed to be, there's no crippling slowdown to speak of, and the sprites and backgrounds are all of similar size, detail, and colors. In fact, outside of a few presentational differences, it's not easy to tell the two apart in a side-by-side. And while I would definitely call Hyperduel a nice looking game, it still pales next to games like Thunder Force 4. I really appreciate the way everything looks, but there is a certain wow factor that it lacks that keeps it from the upper echelon of Saturn shoot-'em-up visuals. Many of the backgrounds lack depth and the set pieces often associate it with the heavy hitters. That doesn't mean it doesn't have any, however. There are stages here that are truly impressive and do look great, there's just not enough of them. That leaves Hyperduel sort of a good-looking game in a sea of spectacular ones. This is readily apparent when you start comparing it to the games that were actually made for the Saturn's hardware, like The sound in Hyperduel is, to be blunt, effing awesome. It's done by the same composer that did Thunder Force 5, and each stage offers up great music to fight to, and all the sound effects feel like they go with the on-screen action. Something to add to your phone or MP3 device so you can listen to it while you're painting that garage or weed-eating that backyard for the 50th time this summer. Music isn't always excelled in my opinion, and it's no different here. My only complaint is that there is no way to control each volume independently of one another. I would have really liked to have turned down the sound effects a bit and cranked up the music. Outside of that though, it's a great soundtrack worthy of your attention. Technosoft wasn't content with just providing you an accurate arcade experience here. They also dropped in the exclusive Saturn mode. This is sort of your director's cut of the original content. There have been numerous changes to the visuals across the ships and backgrounds. Sometimes it's subtle and other times more pronounced, but most everything has been touched up at least a little bit. Technosoft also adjusted the difficulty a bit here in a few places, making once destructible enemy fire invincible, forcing you to move around a bit more and switch up your strategy. The most important change in the Saturn mode though is the ability to lock your firing direction when in armor mode. To do this, hold down the right shoulder button when you are in the position you want, allowing you to really dole out the damage for extended periods of time. This really helps against certain bosses and is a great addition that makes this my preferred way to play, even over the arcade original. There is also a revised soundtrack here that adds all kinds of quality to music that was already awesome to begin with. While Saturn mode isn't an entirely new game, it offers up just enough over the arcade source material to be a robust addition you can't get anywhere else. One thing that really hits home, or in this case your wallet, is the cost of Hyperduel. Buy it now listings will often soar well past the $500 mark, and even auctions are north of $400 regularly. That makes Hyperduel a tough sell to all but the mega collectors among us. I honestly could never justify that kind of expense for a single title for myself, so I certainly cannot justify it to any of you. I will say this however, when it comes to collecting games, I believe very much in the notion that a game that offers you something special or different to be worthy of consideration. Hyperduel is not a common arcade game. You are about as likely as finding one in the wild as you are Bigfoot, and it's even rare for private collections. That makes its port to the Saturn somewhat special by association, and even when you consider emulating it on something like MAME, you are still lacking the Saturn mode editions. What that means in the end is that while I could never justify a $500 video game to you, if you are hell-bent on paying $500 for a collectible Saturn title, this would be the kind of game I'd say you'd need. Looking at Hyperduel outside of its cost, it's definitely a game I recommend you at least play. It has a similar look and feel to some of Technosoft's better games, and while you can find a few Thunder Force titles on the Saturn that look better, Hyperduel still stands on solid ground as a great experience. By the time it was released in late 1996, I believe many gamers in Japan had begun looking for titles with more impressive visuals and savor the challenge of the bullet hell style games in the genre. This kind of left Hyperduel in the middle ground of being more impressive than most 16-bit titles, but lacking the wow factor of the newer 32-bit offerings. All these years later, I think it has emerged as quite the special addition to the library, and not something you can play anyplace else. Add in the 2-player co-op, that kick-ass soundtrack, and the addition of Saturn mode, and you have a shooter that deserves to carry the Technosoft name on its title screen. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.